Hey everyone, welcome to the Building Blocks podcast. I'm your host, Eden Chai, and in today's episode, I'm going to cover how to communicate your ideas effectively as a marketer, specifically to get buy-in from leadership. Now, in today's environment, it's never been harder to get buy-in as an entire organization. The bigger the organization, the harder this is likely going to be. So I chose to interview Bobbi Steward, who's currently the CEO of Revise, but she has this storied marketing career all the way starting with companies such as G5, BH Management, Realtor.com. And in this episode, she takes us on this journey of all of the early wins and obstacles that she experienced, getting G5 and these massive companies to agree to her ideas. She gives us a couple of key frameworks, which I've personally learned a lot from, and I'm hoping you can take away from as well, such as the 131 framework and how she got buy in from an entire organization before she pitched to executives to seal the deal. So I'm hoping you get a ton of value from this. I definitely learned a lot, and you'll walk away from this episode a much better communicator and a marketer that is ready to actually reach their potential. Hope you enjoy. And we're live. Bobbi, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
You know, for this topic, you were absolutely the first person that I thought of, given your experience not only starting your own business, but then going into G5, Realtor.com, BH Management. You've been on so many different sides of the spectrum when it comes to sales, marketing, multifamily, the supplier side, etc. So very curious to get your thoughts on how you get executives to buy in and maybe get some of those juicy stories on successful pitches that you've done. But why don't we kick it off by you telling me the first time that you realized how important it was as a marketer to be able to sell your idea, and just how do you get buy-in from that organization? When's the first time you realize that that's crucial for your career?
That is so right. It's been interesting. And I like to say I've been on the trifecta of real estate, having circled all sides of this industry. I would say it was early on in my career when I was at G5, and I had just, for the first time, been promoted to a director level role in corporate America. And I was really passionate about my function and really passionate about the technical details of what I was doing. And I made the mistake of assuming that everyone else was going to share that same passion for the technical details that I did. And it was through that experience, understanding very quickly that it wasn't about what you were doing and how you were doing it. It was about storytelling and buy-in. And it really was building partnerships and connections, not only to peers, but also to those in upper management, to be able to get stuff done and really feel like you're making progress.
Yeah. And, you know, G5 is a pretty big company, all things said and done, in the multifamily space. As we know, the bigger the ship, the slower it turns. And likely
Yes.
the more separate parties you're going to have to get buy-in from to make that turn. And you're somebody who takes big swings. So I imagine that you weren't just trying to change like the hex code of a color on the website when you're talking about, right?
No. It's so funny. At that point in time, I remember the program. So G5 was fantastic and still is fantastic. It's a wonderful organization. And back in the day when I joined, I think it was 2014, 2015, G5 had just become the very first Google Premier partner in the real estate vertical in North America, which was like so well earned. It was a shocking recognition, and we were all thrilled. But we had entered into this new stratosphere of possibilities, and we were really looking at ways we could take advantage of it and capitalize on it, not only from being able to perform better and build better campaigns and have access to better information and beta tests and technologies from within the Google organization. But then also, like, how do we message this to our customers? How do we message this to the company? How do we get internal buy-in on what this means and work it into all of our sales language? And for me, it made so much sense. I was like, oh my gosh, everyone should be talking about this, every conversation, every single day. And it really did take several swings and misses for me to infiltrate that into the company and get buy-in, even for something as big as that. And so it was a really great learning experience to understand that I needed to hone in on my skills and the ability to get people on board, even when it seemed like a no-brainer.
I mean, a Google Premier Partner, that's just a glaring trust factor. Everybody
Yeah.
knows who Google is. They're slapping a Premier label onto your company's name saying, hey, we back this company. Why was it so difficult for you to get buy in? It seems, I mean, I'm a marketer, so I have this biased perspective as well. But why is that? Why did it take a couple of swings for you to get buy in on something that seems seemingly obvious that we would all be on the same page on? Why were you finding yourself having to juggle the pitch to stakeholders as one customer and then the pitch to customers as your like second customer group, right? Like, why was that so difficult?
And even back at that time, there were only 30 Premier Partners ever, like only 30 that existed. And so we really were in this pretty exclusive club. Whereas now today, the program's changed. It's a little bit less daunting to get accepted into
Yeah.
the Premier Partner program. But I was just like, could not figure out why everyone else wasn't as excited as I was. But I think it came back to like the fundamentals of being able to get executive buy-in, and it starting with the order of events matters. I would say is you can't come at someone cold and it be the very first time that they're hearing about this, right? If this is the very first time that someone's hearing about your idea, then you've already lost, because you really have to start building that foundation of your agenda or whatever it is that you're trying to get buy-in on. And turning skeptics into supporters, it takes time to build consensus and build that effort. And so screaming from the rooftops, like I tried to do back in the day, wasn't the right approach. And so figuring out how to navigate my way through that challenge, through that failure of my first attempt to get buy-in, and then be able to hone my message to make advances and to slowly build that group of supporters. It really started with my peers. And that was a huge learning for me, because I had just assumed, oh, to get things done at a company, to get executive buy-in, you have to go to the executives. When in reality, it was more about getting buy-in from my peers and understanding that, okay, if I can start talking to my peers in sales about how this is going to help their job, it's going to make it easier. It's going to help them open more doors, land more business. They're going to have better talking points. So I actually started creating like covert materials for my peers in sales to be like, hey, test this out and see if you get a reaction from these prospects, which was so much fun. And as soon as that group started getting involved, they started talking about it. And so then the executives over the sales organization got really interested in what was happening. So it was a little bit of a horizontal infiltration to get my first foot in the door.
You took the slow burn approach. I love
Yeah.
it. With sales, if you can get someone to come to a conclusion on their own by feeding them that supporting information, I think that's the strongest level of conviction you can get from anybody. But doing that feels like kind of a mystery. You're like, am I leaving pieces of cheese around my house for the mouse to come find them? It feels like that's what you were doing, right? You said, let me feed this to the sales team. And executives pride themselves on being data driven. You look at this whole organization. What's our
Yep.
sales velocity? How many deals are we closing every month? How much new brand awareness are we creating? So were you able to actually get some unique data points maybe from these conversations that trickled up to sales? Or was it kind of like you knew that this kind of buzz is going to make its way?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say it almost became an Achilles heel. And again, this goes back to me just I'm a technical person, I'm a functional person, I'm an executor. I really love getting in the weeds and understanding the tactical components of what I'm doing. But executives by nature are trained to stay at a certain altitude, right?
Hmm.
And so to be an executive, your skill set has to lean toward quick decision making with limited information and a strong ability to decipher or discern what's happening across the entire organization to make the right decision at the right time. And so having the data, I wanted everyone else to see the data. And so I would present these massive chunks of KPIs and information, all of the acronyms of marketing. And it wasn't landing because it wasn't about being able to data dump on someone to convince them to buy in. It really was about framing the opportunity and the recommendation in a way that was going to move the company forward as a whole. I did actually have quite a bit of success seeding those data points and KPIs to the account management team. So again, making a horizontal move to the customer success team and saying like, hey, here's a slide that you can drop into your next QPR that talks about what's going on here. And here's some KPIs and data points that are going to support that. And that was another move that worked as well. Being able to support that peer group and say like, hey, here, I'm giving you this information for free. It's also going to make you seem smarter. It's going to make your customers happier, and see if you can increase upsell and reduce churn by including this additional piece of information in your quarterly performance reviews with your customers. And so then at that point, having both sales and customer success talking about it and stoked about it and really wanting more, it was at that point that I feel like we started making progress.
Nice. I love how you touched on how it's not a straight line to just walk right up to the executive and just maybe get rejected and walk away. You took the squiggly line approach of going around the whole organization and getting that buy-in, which brings about an amazing question for proving your concept is, can I prove this without just going and asking them for permission to prove it? Right?
Yep,
Sometimes we say, oh, well, they're the CEO, they're on the C-suite, I have to run everything by them. But you took an approach where you're able to partially prove your concept before you even made the pitch, which made it so much easier to say yes. And I think
yep,
sometimes we don't think of all the ways we can make that yes easy on their side, that we just say, oh, well, they hold the the keys to the kingdom. So we have to go pitch them. And if you have to really ask yourself this, because as a marketer, if you're like myself or Bobbi, you like marketing, you're passionate about marketing, but you really have a second job, which is, here is what I know how to do and what I'm passionate about doing. But here's how I'm going to get that to influence change in my organization. And the bigger ship you're on, the bigger that job becomes. So I
yep,
love that you touched on that.
definitely. And it's interesting too, because I think a lot of it has to do with company culture. If you work in an organization where middle management is empowered to make decisions autonomously, where people who are given leadership roles are allowed to lead, then it's a lot easier to go out and do those types of advanced efforts and say, hey, let me prove this in the wild before I go and ask for executive buy in. Whereas if you work at an organization that doesn't necessarily allow directors to direct, it can be significantly harder to do that guerrilla marketing on your idea ahead of time, where you don't feel like you have that ability to take big swings and make big steps without permission. And so some of it does go back to company culture and being in an environment where individuals are encouraged to be innovative and to try new things.
Yeah. And you touched on something earlier, which I think ties into what you just said, which is opportunity. I truly categorize, maybe it's like the simplistic way my brain works, but I categorize executives as opportunistic or risk mitigation.
Yep.
And obviously the size and the type of the company are heavily going to influence how much of each you have. And there's a blend of both, right? But has that ever been an assessment that you've made? Like, I think this person cares a lot more about opportunity and growth. And I think this person is more on the risk averse, risk mitigation side. Is that something that you took into consideration here? Because if you're at like a legacy real estate company, they probably might not be as opportunistic as a young, hungry developer who is, doing something new. Like, let's say Adam Newman's Flow company. I'm sure there's a lot of swings that they're taking right now, and it'll be a different kind of mix. So, is that something that you've assessed before making these kinds of pitches?
100%, 100%. And I'd say even within an organization, there are going to be functions that sit on one side of the fence or the other, just based on what the company's expectation of that function is, right? But you're correct in that most real estate operators by nature have to be risk averse because what we do comes with a lot of regulation. It comes with a lot of risk. And it is really sensitive work, right? We're providing homes for people. And so there is a tendency to be very risk averse. But I don't think the two things are mutually exclusive. I think you can be risk averse and smart and also capitalize on opportunities and be really innovative. And it's an art to combine both of those two things together. I would say that I learned a lot of that in my time at BH, watching an executive team that worked so well together, that had so much trust with each other, that they could collectively take big swings while being very responsible and very fiduciary. It was actually really exciting to watch because they were more innovative in some ways than some tech companies that I had worked for in the past.
It's been amazing watching BH's journey just for that reason alone. I mean, you say, wait, they implemented an internal tool that a company hasn't even been able to build, right? Like things like that. It's really cool to watch. And I think it's important to address the fact that some companies are just not going to allow that kind of room, right? For example, Netflix's founder has a book called No Rules Rules, where he
Yep.
talks about how they purposely don't have this massive rule set at the company of what you are and aren't allowed to do because they only create a certain culture of hiring a type of person who is not going to abuse that and can take the right kind of swings and can align themselves to the company. And then there's other kinds of companies who have an employee handbook that's like longer than the Bible, and
Yeah.
you can't really do anything. You have to ask for approval on any tiny little thing. So it's important to address that, like what we're talking about in this conversation, there's a spectrum, and you do have to make a call based on the company that you're at. And if you're the kind of marketer that thrives off of big swings, you might just be working for a leadership team that doesn't get marketing or doesn't really align with your priorities, and that's okay. I think it might be frustrating to say, okay, like I'm creating this slow burn effect. I'm not going linearly. I'm trying to get buy-in from the organization. I'm proving the concept before I pitch to leadership. And then I do all these things and they're like, no, we don't feel like it. Right. Like, so the, I'm happy that you brought up the fact that culture influences so heavily, because I don't want marketers listening to this to get frustrated that they might just be dealt a set of cards that doesn't support the frameworks that we're talking about here.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. You're never going to get yes every single time. But the the thing to keep in mind is that you're building a muscle, right? You're practicing, you're growing your depth of experience presenting big ideas. And that in and of itself is personally beneficial. Whether the response on the other end is yes or no, you're navigating your way through your career, and how am I going to make an impact, and how am I going to facilitate change, and whether or not the company that you're at wants to embrace those big ideas, you're still taking away that experience yourself. I think having frameworks for requests is a really critical piece of it. Some of my experience in the past working with others, when I was an executive, when I am being an executive, and having heads of and vice presidents and directors reporting to me, understanding that when you go to present an idea, there are many different ways you can do it. And I would work with and coach my teams often on their forms of communication and being consistent in the way that they were presenting ideas or making requests, versus just conversational, which can get really rambly. And as an executive, you don't have time to sort through and understand, okay, what is the problem statement? What are the potential solutions? And what are they recommending? Because there's just so many words happening. Get to the point, right? And so I think having a framework is a really important part of getting buy-in. And it doesn't have to be one specific framework. You don't have to write a business case every single time. But having consistency in the way that you present requests or ideas can help the executive get used to your communication style. And then even if the answer is no, you're still building trust with them. So they can see, oh, this person is thinking really thoroughly through the problems. They're coming up with concise solutions. And I'm starting to trust their communication style, that when they bring something to me, it's important, it's needle moving, and it's something I should pay attention to.
For sure. I'm happy that you brought up the problem statement, because I think any framework that you look at, one thing that should be consistent is never assume that the problem is recognized by the person that
Yep.
you're pitching. And I think as marketers, we get really passionate and we take it for granted and we're so excited about the solution. Like, let's do this, right? And you skip straight over and you go right to the solution. You pitch this executive and they go, what? No, we're not doing this. Like, this is a waste of time and money. And if you had just built up the problem and said,
Yep.
hey, I have a great example early on in my career. I actually think it's so valuable to kind of get slapped in the face when it comes to this, because you get thrown into the fire. And, if you're working at a very rigid company, it's a good reframe to just look at it as you're working on this muscle. There's no better place to work on what we're talking about than working for like a very rigid CEO who's like not, who's very hard to get things by, because that's like your first run being a marathon. Like, you're going to just have to figure it out. You're just going to have to grind it out, and you're going to get so much better in that run than you would training otherwise in an easier environment. So I think there's tons of value in that, which we can talk about. But early in my career, I made a post about this recently. I was working for an industry agnostic marketing software company, and we were marketing to everyone, which is a marketer's kryptonite. And you feel like you can't do anything and nothing's working and your conversion rates are terrible. And I pitched them. I said, hey, why don't we create unique customer journeys for every vertical that we want to be in, which is, according to the leadership team, every vertical. but I said, okay, why don't we just try, right? Like, you want to market to everybody. Why don't we do, let's say pizza shops and gyms, and let's do this. And I had skipped over the problem entirely. Right? I didn't tell them, listen, our conversion rates are below industry average. Our marketing spend, our CAC payback is all below industry average, and we're just doing terribly as a startup. This is not going to work, and the economics are not going to work. I wish that I did that. I wish going back that I did that, but I got slapped right in the face, and I'll never forget what they said. They said, we're not a company for pizza shops. And I was just like, and that just crushed me. And I walked away being like, I have this amazing idea and I know that it will work. How could it not work? It's a proven concept. I'm not the first marketer to do vertical specific marketing.
Yep.
And I won't be the last. It's a proven strategy. It's considered a best practice, but I didn't have the skills to relay the problem and build up the solution to get them to buy in. And I just, we just kept doing what we were doing. And I'm not with that company anymore. But getting slapped in the face early on in your career in regards to this is actually very valuable, because you start working on that muscle, and being in a very rigid environment is the best place to work on that as fast as possible.
Definitely. It's interesting, isn't it? Because it really is taking everything you know as a marketer and deploying it internally, right? If your customer doesn't recognize their pain, they're not going to appreciate the benefits of your product or service. And the same thing happens internally when you're pitching an idea. If this is the first time someone is hearing about this, then it's not going to land. They have to feel the pain. They have to understand what is the problem that we're solving. One of my favorite frameworks, and this is actually one that I stumbled on most recently, that I feel like could have given me such a leg up early on in my career, is the 1-3-1 framework. If you're familiar with that, it is the most concise, most succinct way of presenting a problem. And it's really easy to follow. So step 1, explain the problem. There should be one problem. Don't combine problems. Don't try to build this novel of what's happening in the organization. Just one problem really succinctly. Step 2, present 3 solutions. Here are the 3 potential ways to solve this problem. Definitely include your preferred solution, but do your homework and understand, okay, what are 2 other ways that we could solve for this? And don't just throw something in there to fill space. Like, actually genuinely think about, okay, what are some other options? Could we do this manually? Is there a service? Could we outsource this? What would it look like? And then step 3 is to present your recommendation, which one you think is the best solution and why. And that should provide leadership. Excuse me. That should provide leadership with the information that they need in a really succinct way to understand what it is you're trying to do.
I think that also plays into the psychology of wanting autonomy, right? If you make the decision for me, I'm naturally not wanting to buy in or lean into it. But you show me that you're getting into my headspace and you're saying, no, look, we have options that are open here. You can help and be part of this decision. People don't want decisions made for them. And leadership, I think, often can feel alone, like they're on an island and they're the only ones who can see what's going on. And they're the only ones that feel the pressure and the burden of navigating this massive ship and this massive company. So when you approach it that way, I can see why it resonates so much. Is they want autonomy. We all want autonomy, right?
Yeah.
We're all toddlers inside that just want to choose what we want to eat, and we want to choose every
Yes.
single part of our day, right? That doesn't change. We just get better at managing it as we get older, right? And for executives, I think you play right into that. So you show them that you thought at a 30,000-foot view, which is what they often get upset about. Is
Yep.
you're just in this marketing department and you're in this siloed, you're right on the ground and you don't see what I see. So you're giving me this pitch. You don't know how much this falls flat, and you don't realize how much this isn't relevant. I love that framework, and I'm definitely going to use that. I actually hadn't heard about it until right now.
It's the best. It's absolutely the best, because it does. It packages everything up in the right length with the right amount of autonomy, and shows that you have thought around all sides of the problem. So you are not just stuck on your recommendation, but you're actually considering alternative options and bringing a balanced perspective to the conversation. But again, it can't be the very first time that person has heard about this problem. You've got to market that problem.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that builds a lot of empathy, right? Because if you can show them you're thinking similarly, then they feel like they can relate to you and they're way more open to your ideas. But I think one of the most important parts of pitching to any executive is understanding the kind of business that you're in. And it's easy to have your blinders on and not have any
Yep.
peripheral vision and only see the department you're in and the goal that you have for this quarter and next quarter. Many of the people listening to this podcast are in the real estate world. So, what do you think is important to understand if you're a marketer in real estate about the kind of business you're in? Because we have a few different kinds of businesses. You got third-party managers, you've got owner-managed companies, you've got family offices, REITs, etc. Based on your experience, what would you say is important to understand about the structure of a real estate business and how that can help you get your idea bought in?
Yeah. It distills down to one thing. It's understand how your company makes money. Understand that to the core. Whichever industry you're in, whether you're in tech, whether you're in services, whether you're in real estate, understand how your company makes money, and then you'll understand the motivation behind the company goals, right? And when I say motivation, I mean, how is that company going to achieve success, right? And so when you're able to frame your story that aligns with those broader company goals and visions and aligns with the way that your company makes money, then you're going to immediately have a leg up when presenting your idea to make sure that it's aligned with where the company's going. So if the company's H2 focus is reducing customer churn, and you come up and you present an idea about increasing net new leads, you immediately have a lot of extra work to do to get people to buy into your idea.
I love that. And even though multifamily, let's say, is the consistent piece between all of these, if you look at a third party management company versus a syndication owner managed group, they care about fundamentally different things. And they
They
have two
do.
different customers here, right? I mean, a syndication group, let's say, has a loyalty to their investors and they want their investors to invest in the next deal. And they want their business plan to go according to plan, hit all of their IRRs, all of their return metrics, so they can come back to the investors and say, look at how much money we made you, invest in the next 10 deals with us. A third party management company is serving owners and they look at it a lot differently, right? They're taking a percentage
Yeah.
of the revenue of the community. And in return, they're supposed to provide this service. So it's crazy how both of these different groups are managing and operating multifamily, but they're going to care about fundamentally different things. And it's wildly different being a marketer at one versus the other. But you're a multifamily marketer in both. But
Yeah.
you have different factors at play here, right? Like if you're in a third party fee manager who is losing clients rapidly, right? You're probably going to run a risk mitigation strategy and say, hey, I think we can implement A, B, C idea using your 131 framework of how we can stop losing customers by creating this kind of technological advantage, right? And then if you're looking at a syndication group, maybe you could say, hey, I think doing A, B, and C are critical to hitting our return metrics because we can bring customers in faster, we can increase our retention, et cetera, to get investors to buy in. It's so critical to understand the kind of business you're in. And I love the way you simplified it by saying, just look at how they make money. This is going to be
Yeah.
the North Star for the whole organization. And you're not going to have to do too much more work after that because that's what the whole organization is working towards.
Absolutely. And even on the tech side, it's understanding the funding model. If you're working for a startup that's VC funded, the metrics are going to be so much different than if you're working for a bootstrapped company that's been around for 10 years, right? So it's really being aware of that one focused piece of information, and that's going to give you a huge head start on getting buy-in for your ideas.
Yeah, I think the biggest disconnect, or at least from when I talk to real estate owners, what their qualms are with marketers is being too disconnected from business
Mm.
metrics. And by you saying focus on how this company makes money, you're basically saying, correct me if I'm wrong, align yourself with the business metrics because that is what leadership is looking at. And if you pitch me and you can't describe how it's going to move the needle on our top metrics that we want to influence as a company, then I feel like this is not really going to work out. And it's really hard for me to care about it. But if you can prove to me that you have a similar lens that I do, you've put yourself in my shoes, you see what I care about, you can provide empathy to my stressors that are in my shoes, what I'm worried about, then I'm likely to buy into your idea because I feel like we're on the same team. But that's a struggle, that's a clash that I often see, even with an example as specific as, let's say, like a search ads campaign, right? If you're oftentimes real estate owners want to say, okay, well, show me how many leases I got. And you go, oh, well,
Yeah.
attribution doesn't really work in this industry. And, here we go. So you kind of lost credibility right there. You have to paint a picture and show them that you're aligning to the business results. And technology is making that easier. But for marketers today, it's very much an uphill battle of how to make sure technology helps you make this pitch successfully. Right now, we have obvious limitations, but don't let that be your cop out at the end of saying, well, we have technological limitations. That's still a problem that you can address before a campaign even starts. You can say, listen, here's what success looks like. Here's what failure looks like. Most likely, here are the limitations that are going to prevent us from understanding that. Don't wait until they're saying, okay, show me how much money I made, to say, oh, well, technology, that's not going to give you any credibility either, right?
Yeah. I I have a hot take, and I've had this hot take for a while, and I think I've talked about it a few times over the last few years. But I think that technology is actually what has handcuffed marketers because we've promoted this idea that marketing can be measured so granularly that people tend to leverage the metrics in a way that has really held us back from being able to make the right decisions at the right time because we're chasing KPIs like conversion rates and lifetime values and CAC and all of these things that we collectively believe are helpful and are measurable and are true, when the reality is they may not be true. And I don't believe them to be true. I think, like, one of my favorite sayings is you're never going to know what marketing moved the needle until you can put a tracking code on someone's heart, right? And it's such a cheesy saying, but it's so true because humans are motivated by different things and everyone makes decisions differently. And so there are things that we can do as marketers to motivate and encourage and move the needle. And there are software systems and tools that claim to measure KPIs, but you're never really going to know exactly what it was that convinced someone to trust you and buy from you, which is such a human emotion. Like we can wrap it in technology all we want, but at the end of the day, people deal with people and people make decisions based on people.
When I made this realization, I can't agree with what you're saying more. I don't even think it's a hot take. But when I made this realization, I stopped caring about attribution altogether because I said it just doesn't matter. I don't care what this model tells me. And I think marketing success relies in how much confidence you have in the things that you can't measure. I
Yep,
watched a UFC fight the other night, and Modelo, the beer, has a logo plastered inside of the cage, right? Do you think they're reporting how many impressions and sales they got from their logo plastered? It's a physical logo. There's like not even like sure you can get video views. Like you're never going to figure out how much money that made you. And I have another business case, which is one of my favorite business cases, is not too long ago, Airbnb decided to divest in direct response marketing and move most of that money into brand. So if you've seen all those Airbnb
yep,
billboards, a lot of that kind of top of funnel approach, and they said their customer acquisition payback has never been higher. So by taking a unproven or not provable approach, which is difficult to do. They're a massive organization. Like if they're a ship, they're like the Titanic, right? Like you
yeah,
to move that organization is crazy difficult. But they made that decision, and by waiting enough time, they were able to prove, hey, but we got the numbers that we wanted in the end. And I think this is one of the biggest challenges for real estate marketers because the kind of person that usually gets into real estate investing and ownership is a very numbers oriented person. And
hmm,
tracking the numbers on a deal is not that hard. You either hit your metrics or you didn't. And it's very easy to measure success because you have a black and white measuring stick of saying, if this deal hit 30% IRR, then it worked. And I'm going to get investors for the next one and I'm going to sell it and I'm going to make the profit. And we made 5 million. So when a marketer tells you, but we can't do that for the marketing piece,
yep,
they're not going to like it. But that's your challenge as a marketer to say, how am I going to communicate this? How am I going to show them that the emotion means that we can't prove everything with logic? And that's how marketing works because human decisions are powered by emotion and justified with logic. And you can't just use logic the whole way through because you're not going to see the whole picture. And when I made that realization, I just stopped caring about attribution. And I said, just do what you know works, which is the human psychology piece, which has been universal for since the beginning of time.
yep. And doing what you know works it's very freeing. And not everyone can do it, right? Because you might be in an organization where you have a leadership team that has bought into the idea of marketing being detrimentally measurable, and you're going to be held to these metrics. And so being able to find a balance there is the toughest part of your job. But there's power in always going back to that. How does my company make money? And tying everything back to that. And so you might have a quarter where your metrics look great. You might have a couple of quarters where your metrics look terrible. But regardless of what's happening on that front, always be able to tie your story back to the company's success.
And just because it's very difficult to prove marketing attribution because of human nature, it doesn't mean that you can't tell stories that can get buy-in from executives on your approach. So for example, we know that the bigger the purchase size, the harder it is to prove how that purchase happened. Think about
Yeah.
cars, houses, any large purchase. The bigger the dollar amount, the longer the sales cycle usually is, and the harder it is to track it down to one specific source. I can get an ad for toilet paper on Amazon, click it, and they're all celebrating. Look, this Instagram
Yep.
ad has this kind of ROAS, right? Like, great, this is amazing. But when it comes to buying a car, buying a house, I think it's a good idea, if you have the time, if your executives are willing to entertain it, to say, walk me through how you bought your last car. Did you see an ad, click on it, and then pay $55,000 for your Ram truck? I don't think so,
Yep.
right? How am I going to track all the touch points? Tell me, oh, so your friend told you about it, and then you went on the website, but then you exited the website and went on your phone, and then you went to the dealership, and this was a 3-month process. Okay, so what ad exactly resulted in that purchase? Can you tell me? You can tell stories that can get this across, right? And maybe do it in a better way than I just did it. But I think you're not totally handcuffed when it comes to this. Stories are your superpower for getting them on the same page as you. So, well, I think this is a great place to cap it off. I really appreciate you coming on the show. And I learned so much personally from this conversation, and I'm excited to get the feedback on what other marketers are learning from it. So thank you so much, Bobbi.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much for tuning into this week's episode of Building Blocks. I hope you found some value in the conversation. If you want to get updated every time a new episode drops, feel free to follow me on LinkedIn at Eden Chai, or just head over to our website, getflare.io, and subscribe. You'll see our newsletter there as well. That's all for today. I'll catch you next time.